settle in. This one starts with a phone call that came too late. It was just after midnight when the 911 dispatcher logged the request. A wellness check at the Riverside Apartments, Building C, Unit 412. The caller identified herself as Monica Torres, the building manager. She stated that one of her tenants, a man named David Brennan, had missed 2 days of work, wasn't answering his phone, and his employer had called her. Worried. The dispatcher noted that Monica sounded uncertain, like she wasn't sure this qualified as an emergency, but she'd promised David's boss she would check, and when she knocked on his door, she heard nothing. No movement, no response, just silence. Detective Sarah Chen caught the case because she was on call that night, and because wellness checks in her precinct had a way of turning into something else. She arrived at the Riverside complex just before 1 in the morning. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over residential neighborhoods in the dead of winter, when everyone's inside, doors locked, heat running. Monica Torres met her in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a building master key clutched in her hand. Chen asked the standard questions. When was the last confirmed sighting of David Brennan? Monica recalled seeing him 4 days earlier, leaving for work in the morning. He'd waved at her in the parking lot. Normal interaction. Had there been any complaints? Any disturbances? No. David was quiet, kept to himself, always paid rent on time. Did he have visitors? Occasionally, but no one Monica recognized. Did he seem distressed lately? Monica hesitated, then admitted she didn't know him well enough to say. They took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like old carpet and radiator heat. Monica knocked on 412, called David's name. Nothing. Chen knocked harder, identified herself as police. Still nothing. Monica used her key, but the door wouldn't open. The deadbolt was engaged from the inside. Chen felt the first prickle of unease. She radioed for backup, then asked Monica if there was a fire escape or balcony access. There was. The building had exterior balconies on every unit. They went around to the exterior stairwell. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the metal steps were slick with ice. Chen climbed carefully, Monica staying below. The balcony door to Unit 412 was a sliding glass panel with vertical blinds on the inside. Chen cupped her hands against the glass, peered through a gap in the blinds. The lights were off inside, but ambient glow from the parking lot lamps gave her just enough visibility to see the living room. Furniture. A couch. A coffee table, and then, past the living room threshold, in what looked like the bedroom doorway, she saw a shape on the floor. Chen's pulse kicked up. She tried the sliding door. Locked. She radioed again, requested an entry team. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers arrived with a pry bar. They forced the balcony door open, breaking the lock mechanism. Cold air rushed into the apartment as Chen stepped inside, flashlight up. The apartment was cold, unnaturally cold, like the heat hadn't been on in days. Chen moved through the living room, her flashlight sweeping over a couch, a small dining table, a kitchen counter stacked with unopened mail. Everything looked ordinary until she reached the bedroom doorway. David Brennan was on the floor, slumped against the bed frame. He wore jeans and a t-shirt. His skin was pale, lips slightly blue. Chen didn't need to check for a pulse to know he was gone, and from the state of the body, he'd been dead for at least 2 days, maybe more. She secured the scene immediately. No one else entered until the medical examiner and crime scene unit arrived an hour later. While they worked, Chen walked the apartment again, this time looking at details. The front door was locked from the inside, deadbolt engaged, chain lock in place. The balcony door had been locked until they forced it. All windows were closed and latched from the inside. The apartment was sealed. The bedroom itself was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet. A double bed, a nightstand, a dresser. The nightstand held a lamp, a phone charger, a glass of water. The dresser had a few personal items on top. Keys, wallet, loose change. On the bed, the sheets were rumpled but not violently disturbed. On the floor near David's body, there was a bottle. Prescription pills. The label read Ambien, prescribed to David Brennan. The bottle was empty. The initial read looked straightforward. A man alone in a locked apartment, dead on the floor with an empty bottle of sleeping pills nearby. The medical examiner, Dr. Patel, arrived and did a preliminary assessment. No obvious signs of trauma. No visible wounds, no ligature marks, no defensive injuries. Body temperature and rigor mortis suggested death had occurred approximately 72 hours prior. Cause of death would require an autopsy and toxicology. But the working assumption was overdose, likely intentional. Chen stood in the doorway and studied the scene. Something felt off, but she couldn't place it yet. She asked the crime scene techs to photograph everything, bag the pill bottle, check for prints. She walked the apartment one more time, opening closets, checking the bathroom, looking in the kitchen cabinets. In the bathroom, she found another prescription bottle, this one half full. Also Ambien, same prescription date. 2 bottles. One empty, one not. She asked Dr. Patel if that was unusual. He shrugged, stated that people sometimes get refills early or have multiple prescriptions from different doctors, though that would show up in a database check. Chen made a note to verify. She also noted that the apartment showed no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture in the bedroom, no broken glass. If David had taken a lethal dose of pills, he'd done so calmly, methodically. But then there was the water glass on the nightstand. Chen leaned in close. The glass was full, untouched. If someone takes a bottle of pills, they usually need water to swallow them. Why was the glass still full? She pointed this out to Dr. Patel. He acknowledged it, ventured that David might have used water from the bathroom sink, or swallowed the pills dry, or taken them over a period of time. All possible. But it stuck in Chen's mind. The crime scene unit finished processing around 4 in the morning. David's body was removed for autopsy. Chen sealed the apartment and left a patrol officer to stand watch until morning. She went back to the precinct, started the paperwork, and sent a request to the lab for expedited toxicology. The case number was assigned, filed under suspicious death, pending final determination. But Chen didn't go home. She sat at her desk and pulled up David Brennan's background. Age 32. Worked as a software developer for a tech firm downtown. No criminal record. No history of mental health crises documented in police databases. No prior wellness checks, no domestic disturbance calls. He was a ghost in the system, which usually meant someone who kept their head down and stayed out of trouble. She called his employer, left a message requesting a callback first thing in the morning. Then she pulled the building's security footage. The Riverside apartments had a single camera covering the main entrance and parking lot, low resolution but functional. Chen scrubbed through the last week of footage. David appeared on camera 4 days prior, leaving the building at 8 in the morning, presumably headed to work. He returned that evening around 6, carrying a grocery bag. He entered the building alone. After that, nothing. No one entered or exited Unit 412, at least not through the main entrance. Chen leaned back in her chair. A man goes into his apartment and never comes out. 4 days later, he's found dead, locked inside with an empty pill bottle. The natural conclusion was that he'd taken his own life. But the full water glass nagged at her. And something else. The apartment had been cold, very cold. But the thermostat in the living room had been set to 72 degrees. If the heat had been running, the apartment wouldn't have been that cold unless the balcony door had been open for an extended period. But it was locked when they arrived. She made another note, flagged it for follow-up. At 5:30 in the morning, she finally left the precinct, drove home, and slept for 3 hours. When she woke, the autopsy report wasn't in yet, but her phone had 2 messages. One from David's employer, a man named Greg Sutton, asking her to call back urgently. The other from Dr. Patel, requesting she come to the medical examiner's office. Chen called Greg Sutton first. He sounded shaken, insisted that David had been fine at work. No signs of distress, no indication he was struggling. In fact, David had been in the middle of a major project, a product launch scheduled for the following week. He'd been excited about it, energized. Greg recalled David mentioning plans to celebrate after the launch. Did that sound like someone planning to end their life? Chen asked if David had seemed worried about anything, any conflicts at work, any personal issues. Greg hesitated, then mentioned that David had broken up with his girlfriend a few months back, but he'd seemed to be handling it well. They'd remained on good terms as far as Greg knew. Chen asked for the girlfriend's name. Greg provided it, Emily Russo. Chen thanked him, ended the call, and immediately ran Emily Russo through the system. No record. She found a social media profile, confirmed it was the right person, and noted her address. Then she drove to the medical examiner's office. Dr. Patel met her in the hallway outside the autopsy suite. He looked tired, and he got straight to the point. The preliminary tox screen was back, and it showed high levels of zolpidem, the active ingredient in Ambien, consistent with a potentially lethal overdose. But there was something else. David's stomach contents showed no evidence of pill casings or significant pill residue. The zolpidem appeared to have been absorbed rapidly, which suggested it had been ingested in liquid form or crushed and dissolved. not swallowed as whole tablets. Chen felt her pulse quicken. If David had crushed the pills and dissolved them, that suggested premeditation, a deliberate act. But it also opened another possibility. Someone else could have done it. She voiced this to Dr. Patel. He acknowledged the possibility, clarified that the manner of death was still undetermined pending further investigation, but he was flagging it as suspicious. He also noted something else. David's body showed signs of lividity consistent with having been moved after death. The blood pooling pattern suggested he'd died, lying flat. But he was found slumped against the bed frame. That changed everything. If David had died in one position and been moved to another, someone else had been in that apartment after his death. Chen asked if Dr. Patel could estimate how long after death the body had been moved. He estimated within a few hours, based on the lividity patterns. So David died, and within hours someone repositioned him. Chen left the medical examiner's office and went straight to Emily Rousseau's address. It was mid-morning, and Emily answered the door in pajamas, looking like she'd just woken up. Chen introduced herself, observed Emily's reaction. Shock, then confusion, then visible distress when Chen informed her that David was dead. Emily invited her in, and they sat in a small living room cluttered with textbooks and coffee mugs. Emily recounted that she and David had dated for about a year, then mutually decided to end the relationship a few months back. They'd remained friendly, texted occasionally, but hadn't seen each other in person in over a month. She insisted David had seemed fine the last time they'd talked, about 2 weeks prior. He'd mentioned work was busy but good. No indication of depression, no talk of feeling overwhelmed. Emily's voice cracked when she asked how he'd died. Chen explained the circumstances, the locked apartment, the pill bottle. Emily's face went pale. Chen asked if David had ever talked about taking his own life, if he'd ever expressed suicidal thoughts. Emily shook her head firmly, declared that David wasn't like that. He was optimistic, future-oriented. Even when they broke up, he'd handled it maturely, talked about staying friends, moving forward. She couldn't believe he would do this. Chen asked if David had any enemies, anyone who might want to harm him. Emily hesitated, then mentioned that David had been having issues with a co-worker, someone named Ryan Holt. They'd clashed over the product launch, some kind of disagreement about project direction. Emily didn't know the details, but David had mentioned it in passing, stated it was frustrating but manageable. Chen made a note of Ryan Holt's name. She thanked Emily, asked her to call if she remembered anything else, and left. Back in her car, she sat for a moment, processing. David's girlfriend didn't believe he was suicidal. His employer didn't see any signs. The medical examiner found evidence suggesting the body had been moved. The zolpidem was ingested in a non-standard form, and the apartment had been locked from the inside with no signs of forced entry. She drove back to the Riverside apartments, went up to Unit 4-1, and stood in the doorway. The crime scene tape was still up. She entered, put on gloves, and walked through the space again. This time, she focused on the locks. The front door had a standard deadbolt and a chain lock, both engaged when they arrived. The only other entry point was the balcony door, which had also been locked. How does someone die, get moved, and then lock themselves in from the inside? She examined the balcony door more closely. The lock was a simple latch mechanism, nothing sophisticated. She stepped out onto the balcony, looked around. The neighboring balconies were close, maybe 6 feet apart, but separated by a waist-high divider. Theoretically, someone could climb from one balcony to another, but it would be risky, especially in the dark. Chen leaned over the railing, looked down. 4 stories. Lethal drop. She went back inside, checked the windows. All closed and latched from the inside. No tampering. She returned to the front door, examined the chain lock. It was a standard sliding chain, the kind you engage by sliding a small metal ball along a track and hooking it into a slot. Simple, but effective. To engage it from the outside would require fishing something through the gap, a string or a wire, hooking it around the chain, and pulling it into place. Difficult, but not impossible. Chen crouched down, ran her flashlight along the door gap. She saw something. A tiny scratch mark on the metal plate, where the chain attached to the door frame. Fresh, no oxidation. She took a photo, called the crime scene unit, and requested they come back to document and test for trace evidence if someone had manipulated the chain lock from the outside. There might be fibers, tool marks, something. While waiting for the crime scene techs, Chen sat in the living room and called David's employer again. This time, she asked specifically about Ryan Holt. Greg Sutton confirmed that Ryan and David had been working on the same project. Tensions had flared over technical decisions, but nothing serious enough to warrant HR involvement. Chen asked for Ryan's contact information. Greg provided it, added that Ryan had been out of the office for the last 2 days. Personal leave. Chen's instincts fired. She thanked Greg, ended the call, and immediately ran Ryan Holt's background. Age 29, also a software developer, no criminal record, clean profile. She called his cell phone. No answer. She left a message, identified herself, requested a call back regarding a police investigation. Then, she drove to Ryan's address, a condo complex about 15 minutes from the Riverside apartments. No one answered when she knocked. She checked with the building manager, who confirmed Ryan lived there, but hadn't seen him in a few days. Chen left her card, asked the manager to call if Ryan showed up. She was walking back to her car when her phone rang. The crime scene tech called to report that they'd found synthetic fibers caught in the chain lock mechanism, consistent with fishing line or thin nylon cord. The scratch marks suggested repeated attempts to manipulate the lock from outside. Someone had definitely rigged the chain after exiting the apartment. Chen sat in her car, engine running, heat on full. The picture was coming together, but it still had gaps. If someone had killed David, made it look like a suicide, and then locked the apartment from the outside to create the appearance of a sealed room, they'd gone to significant effort. But why? What was the motive? And how did they get David to ingest a lethal dose of zolpidem without him resisting? She thought about the water glass again. Full, untouched. If David had taken the pills voluntarily, he would have needed water. But if someone had given him the drug in a drink, something he consumed willingly, then the glass on the nightstand would have remained full, because it was never used. Chen pulled out her phone, called Dr. Patel, asked if the autopsy had found any other substances in David's system. Dr. Patel confirmed the tox screen showed traces of alcohol, low levels, consistent with 1 or 2 drinks consumed several hours before death. Chen asked if zolpidem could be dissolved in alcohol. Dr. Patel confirmed it could, especially if crushed first. The bitter taste might be masked by a strong liquor or a mixed drink. Chen thanked him, ended the call. She now had a working theory. Someone had visited David, brought a drink laced with crushed Ambien, waited for him to lose consciousness, then staged the scene to look like a suicide. They'd taken the empty Ambien bottle, placed it near the body, positioned David on the floor, and exited via the balcony door, locking it from outside. Then they'd rigged the chain lock on the front door using fishing line, creating the illusion of a locked room. But who? And why? Chen drove back to the precinct, pulled Ryan Holt's phone records with a warrant request, and started mapping David's last known contacts. His cell phone had been found in the apartment, and the tech unit had extracted the data. The last text message David sent was 3 days before his estimated time of death, a work-related message to a colleague. No calls in or out after that. But there was one interesting detail. 2 days before his death, David had received a call from a number registered to a burner phone, purchased at a convenience store with cash. Untraceable. Chen leaned forward. Someone had called David from a burner phone. That suggested premeditation, planning. She cross-referenced the time of the call with the security footage from the Riverside apartments. The call came in at 7 in the evening. On the footage, David was visible entering the building at 6:15, alone. At 7:40, the camera captured another figure entering the building, face obscured by a hooded jacket, carrying a bag. The figure went to the elevator, disappeared from view. 20 minutes later, the same figure exited, still hooded, walking quickly to a car in the parking lot. The license plate was partially visible. Chen enhanced the image, ran the partial plate. It came back registered to a vehicle owned by Ryan Holt. Her pulse spiked. She immediately put out a bolo for Ryan's car, requested patrol units to check his residence and known locations. Within 2 hours, a unit spotted the car parked outside a motel on the edge of town. Chen grabbed her partner, Detective Mike Torres, and they drove out together. The motel was a low-budget roadside place, the kind with exterior room doors and peeling paint. The manager confirmed Ryan Holt had checked in 2 days prior, paid cash, kept the room. Chen and Torres knocked on the room door, identified themselves as police. No response. They knocked again, louder. After a long silence, the door opened a crack, and Ryan Holt stood there, looking disheveled and exhausted. He didn't run. He just stared at them. Chen told him they needed to talk about David Brennan. Ryan's face crumpled. He stepped back, let them in, and sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled stale, like someone who'd been inside too long. Chen asked Ryan where he'd been for the last few days. Ryan muttered that he'd been here, thinking, trying to figure out what to do. Chen asked what he meant. Ryan looked up, and his eyes were red. He confessed, voice shaking. He'd gone to David's apartment that night, brought a bottle of whiskey as a peace offering. They'd been arguing at work, and Ryan wanted to smooth things over. He'd crushed up some Ambien and mixed it into David's drink when David wasn't looking. Ryan insisted he didn't intend to kill him, only wanted to knock him out, teach him a lesson, make him miss the next day of work so Ryan could take credit for the project. But David had drunk the whole glass, passed out quickly, and then stopped breathing. Ryan panicked. He tried CPR, but it didn't work. He realized David was dead, and he was going to be blamed. So he staged it. He took the empty Ambien bottle from David's medicine cabinet, placed it near the body, positioned David to make it look like he'd collapsed after taking the pills. Then he left through the balcony, locked it from outside using a coat hanger to manipulate the latch, and used fishing line threaded through the door gap to engage the chain lock on the front door. He thought if the apartment looked sealed, the police would assume it was a suicide and close the case quickly. Chen listened, her voice cold, asking clarifying questions. Why the burner phone? Ryan admitted he'd called David earlier that evening to set up the visit. Used a burner because he didn't want a record of contact in case things went wrong. He'd been planning to drug David for days, bought the burner and the fishing line in advance. It was premeditated, calculated. Torres cuffed Ryan, read him his rights. Ryan didn't resist. As they walked him out to the patrol car, he kept repeating that he didn't mean to kill him, that it was supposed to be a prank, a way to get ahead at work. Chen didn't respond. Intent or not, David Brennan was dead, and Ryan Holt had staged the scene, manipulated evidence, and tried to cover it up. That made it murder. Back at the precinct, Ryan gave a full statement, signed a confession. The DA filed charges: second-degree murder, evidence tampering, obstruction. The case file was closed within a week. The locked room mystery that had seemed so perfect, so airtight, unraveled because of a full water glass, a scratch mark on a chain lock, and a partial license plate on grainy security footage. Chen attended David Brennan's funeral, stood in the back, and watched his family and friends mourn. Emily Russo was there, crying quietly. Greg Sutton gave a eulogy, talking about David's talent, his kindness, his future cut short. Chen didn't stay for the reception. She went back to the precinct, filed the final report, and moved on to the next case. But late at night, when the precinct was quiet and the rain drummed against the windows, Chen sometimes thought about that apartment, about how close Ryan Holt had come to getting away with it, about how a single overlooked detail, a glass of water that should have been empty, had been the thread that pulled the whole lie apart. In homicide work, the smallest things mattered. A scratch, a fiber, a glass. The difference between a closed case and an unsolved mystery was often just that. One detail no one thought to check, until someone did. And that detail, that tiny piece of evidence that didn't fit, was what kept detectives like Chen awake at night. Because for every case they solved, there was always the possibility of one they missed. One locked room that stayed locked. One lie that held. She told herself not to think about it, to trust the process, to follow the evidence. But the doubt never fully left. It sat in the back of her mind, quiet and persistent, like rain that never quite stopped. Chen closed the case file, turned off her desk lamp, and walked out into the cold December night. Snow was falling again, covering the city in fresh white, erasing the old tracks, making everything look clean. But she knew better. Under the snow, the city was still the same, still full of locked rooms and hidden truths. And somewhere out there, another call would come in, another wellness check, another door that wouldn't open. And she would go, because that was the job, to open the doors no one else could, to find the detail that didn't fit, to make sure the locked rooms didn't stay locked forever. The rain continued to fall, steady and cold, washing the streets, filling the gutters, drowning out the sounds of the city. And in the silence between the drops, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear it. The scratch of fishing line against metal, the click of a latch engaging, the soft sound of a door closing for the last time, the sound of a secret almost kept. Almost. But not quite. The case officially closed 3 weeks after Ryan Holt's confession, but the ripples kept spreading. Chen returned to her regular rotation, working through a backlog of domestic violence calls and property crimes. But the Brennan case stayed with her in ways she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't the resolution that bothered her. Ryan had confessed. The evidence lined up. The DA was moving forward with prosecution. It was something else. Something she couldn't name yet. She was at her desk on a Thursday morning, sorting through witness statements for an unrelated assault case, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. She answered anyway, identified herself. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, hesitant and quiet. The caller identified herself as Monica Holt, Ryan's older sister. She apologized for bothering Chen, clarified that she wasn't trying to interfere with the case, but she needed to tell someone what she'd found. Chen sat up straighter, grabbed a pen. Monica explained that she'd been cleaning out Ryan's apartment at his request, boxing up his belongings while he awaited trial. In the back of his closet, she'd discovered a notebook filled with handwritten entries. At first, she thought it was a journal, but as she read, she realized it was something else. Planning notes, detailed observations, timelines. Chen asked Monica to bring the notebook to the precinct immediately. Monica agreed, arrived within the hour. She was in her mid-30s, tired-looking, carrying a worn canvas bag. She handed Chen a spiral-bound notebook with a black cover, the kind you'd buy at any office supply store. Chen thanked her, asked if Monica had read the entire thing. Monica nodded, voice strained, and remarked that she didn't recognize her brother anymore. Chen didn't respond, just took the notebook and watched Monica leave. Alone in the interview room, Chen opened the notebook and started reading. The first entry was dated 4 months before David Brennan's death. Ryan had written about a project at work, a major software rollout that would determine promotions and bonuses. He'd noted that David was the lead developer, getting all the credit, while Ryan did most of the back-end work. The tone was bitter, resentful. The entries continued, week by week, documenting perceived slights, moments where Ryan felt overlooked or dismissed. By the second month, the entries shifted. Ryan started writing about ways to undermine David, small acts of sabotage, deleting files, introducing bugs into code, spreading rumors. Then, 3 months in, the entries changed again. Ryan wrote about a conversation he'd overheard between David and their manager, Greg Sutton. David had apparently expressed concern about Ryan's performance, suggested that Ryan might need to be reassigned or let go. Ryan's handwriting grew sharper, angrier. He wrote that David had betrayed him, stolen his work, and now wanted to destroy his career. The entries became obsessive, tracking David's daily routine, his habits, his apartment building's security layout. 2 months before the murder, Ryan wrote about Ambien. He'd researched its effects, dosage, lethality. He noted that David took the medication occasionally for insomnia, kept a prescription bottle in his apartment. Ryan wrote that if David had an accident, no one would question it. The entries detailed his purchase of the burner phone, the fishing line, the practice runs manipulating door locks with makeshift tools. He'd planned every step, rehearsed the method, anticipated the investigation. Chen read it all, her jaw tight. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. This was premeditated murder, planned over months, executed with precision. Ryan's confession had downplayed the intent, framed it as a foolish mistake. But the notebook told a different story. She immediately contacted the DA, scanned and sent copies of the relevant pages. The DA's office reviewed the material and upgraded the charges to first-degree murder. Ryan's defense attorney tried to suppress the notebook, argued it was obtained without a warrant. But the judge ruled that Monica had legal access to Ryan's apartment and had voluntarily provided the evidence. It stood. The trial was set for late spring. Chen was called to testify. Spent 2 days on the stand walking through the investigation, the evidence, the timeline. Ryan sat at the defense table, expressionless, while his attorney argued that the notebook was fantasy, creative writing, not a real plan. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 6 hours and returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Ryan Holt was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the sentencing, Chen walked out of the courthouse into a grey afternoon. The snow had melted weeks ago, leaving the streets wet and dirty. She stood on the steps, watching people pass by, and felt the weight of the case finally lift. It was over. David Brennan's family had justice. Ryan Holt would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The locked room had been opened, the lie exposed. But as Chen drove back to the precinct, she thought about the notebook again, about how close Ryan had come to succeeding. If he hadn't kept those notes, if his sister hadn't found them, the case might have stayed at second-degree murder, might have ended with a lighter sentence. And if Chen hadn't noticed the water glass, hadn't questioned the locked doors, the case might have closed as a suicide. The margin between justice and failure was so thin, so fragile. She parked outside the precinct, sat in the car for a moment, and stared at the building. Inside, there were more case files waiting, more locked doors, more secrets. She thought about the other cases she'd worked, the ones that hadn't resolved so cleanly, the ones where the evidence ran out or the witnesses disappeared or the trail went cold. She thought about the families still waiting, still hoping, still checking their phones for a call that might never come. Chen got out of the car, locked it, and walked inside. The precinct was loud, phones ringing, officers talking, the constant hum of a police station at work. She went to her desk, logged into the system, and pulled up her active cases. 3 assaults, 2 burglaries, 1 missing person. She started with the missing person, a woman named Laura Vance, age 32, last seen leaving a bar downtown 6 days ago. No contact with family or friends since, no activity on her credit cards, no cell phone signal. Chen read through the initial report, made a list of leads to follow, and picked up the phone. The work continued, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. 1 case closed, another opened. 1 locked room solved, another waiting. She dialed the number for Laura Vance's sister, introduced herself, and started asking questions. The answers were vague, uncertain, full of gaps. Chen took notes, listened for the detail that didn't fit, the thing that would open the door. Because that was the job. To keep looking, keep questioning, keep opening the locked rooms no one else could. And if the rain kept falling, if the nights stayed dark, if the secrets kept piling up, then Chen would keep working, 1 case at a time, 1 detail at a time, until the doors opened, or until she ran out of doors to open. Months passed. The Brennan case faded from the headlines, replaced by newer tragedies, newer scandals. Chen moved through her caseload, solved some, lost others, kept working. She attended Ryan Holt's appellate hearing, testified again, watched the appeals court uphold the conviction. Ryan's attorney filed for a retrial based on procedural grounds, but it was denied. The case was closed. Final. Done. Chen thought she was finished with it, but one evening, nearly a year after the trial, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "About David Brennan." She almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made her open it instead. The message was short, unsigned, and unsettling. It read, "You got the right guy, but you didn't get the whole story. Check David's old emails. Look for the name Allison March. She's the reason Ryan did it. She's the reason David died. No one ever asked about her." Chen stared at the screen, her instincts firing again. She ran the name Allison March through the database. No criminal record, no active warrants. But there was a driver's license photo. Woman in her late 20s, brown hair, plain features. Address listed in a suburb outside the city. Chen pulled David Brennan's case file again, scrolled through the digital evidence logs. His email account had been imaged and stored, but the initial investigation had focused on work correspondence and recent contacts. No one had done a deep dive into older messages. Chen requested access to the full email archive, spent the next 2 hours searching for the name Allison March. She found it buried in messages from 3 years prior. David and Allison had exchanged dozens of emails, mostly casual, friendly. But then, the tone shifted. Allison had written about her relationship troubles, her failing marriage, her loneliness. David had responded with support, encouragement. The messages grew more frequent, more personal. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The last email from Allison was a single line. "I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me again." End quote. David had replied, apologizing, asking if he'd done something wrong. No response. Chen checked the dates. The email exchange had ended 2 months before Ryan Holt started his notebook entries. She pulled Ryan's visitor logs from the jail, requested a meeting. Ryan's attorney objected, but Chen wasn't interrogating him about his case. She just wanted to ask about Allison March. Ryan agreed to talk. Chen sat across from Ryan in the prison visiting room, the same room where families cried and inmates made promises they couldn't keep. Ryan looked older, thinner, the confidence he'd carried during the trial gone. Chen asked him directly, who was Allison March? Ryan's face tightened. He hesitated, then admitted that Allison had been his girlfriend. They'd dated for 2 years, lived together, talked about marriage. Then she'd met David at a work event, started spending time with him. Ryan insisted nothing physical happened, but Allison had become emotionally distant, distracted. Eventually, she'd broken up with Ryan, declared that she needed space, needed to figure out her life. Ryan believed David had stolen her, poisoned her mind against him. Chen pressed him. Was Allison the real motive? Ryan's eyes flashed with anger, but he nodded. He acknowledged that everything had started because of her, because David had taken the one person who mattered to him. The work rivalry, the resentment, the planning, it all traced back to Allison. But Ryan insisted he'd never told anyone, never wanted the trial to become about her. He'd kept her name out of it to protect her, even though she'd destroyed his life. Chen left the prison, mind racing. The anonymous email had been right. There was more to the story. But did it matter? Ryan was already serving life. The conviction was solid. Knowing that Allison March had been the catalyst didn't change the facts of the case. But Chen couldn't let it go. She needed to understand the full picture. She tracked down Allison March's current address, drove out to a quiet suburban neighborhood, parked outside a modest single-family home. Allison answered the door, wary and suspicious. Chen identified herself, explained that she was following up on the David Brennan case. Allison's face went pale. She invited Chen inside, offered coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around the mug. Chen asked her about David. Allison confirmed that she'd known him, that they'd been friends, that she'd confided in him during a difficult time in her life. But she insisted there had been no romantic relationship, no affair. David had been kind, supportive, nothing more. When her relationship with Ryan had fallen apart, she'd cut contact with David to avoid complications, to give herself space to heal. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She'd learned about his death from the news, been devastated, but hadn't reached out to the police because she hadn't thought she had anything relevant to contribute. Chen believed her. Allison seemed genuine, shaken, unaware of the role she'd played in Ryan's obsession. Chen asked if Allison had any idea who might have sent the anonymous email. Allison shook her head, voice strained, and suggested it might have been someone from Ryan's life. Someone who knew the history and wanted to stir things up. Chen thanked her, left her card, and drove back to the city. The anonymous email remained a mystery. Chen traced the sender's IP address, found it routed through a VPN, untraceable. She checked with Ryan's family, his friends, his former co-workers. No one admitted to sending it. Eventually, Chen let it drop. The email had revealed a motive, a deeper layer to the case, but it didn't change the outcome. Ryan Holt was guilty. David Brennan was dead. Allison March was an unwitting catalyst, nothing more. But the case stayed with Chen, not because it was unsolved, but because it was solved too neatly. Every question had an answer. Every door had been opened. And yet, the anonymous email lingered, a loose thread that didn't quite tie off. Who had sent it? Why? What did they gain by revealing Allison's name a year after the trial? Chen had no answers, and eventually, she stopped looking. She moved on to other cases, other locked rooms, other secrets. The city kept generating them, an endless supply of mysteries that needed solving. Chen worked them all, one by one, patient and methodical, always looking for the detail that didn't fit, and the rain kept falling. Steady and cold, washing the streets, filling the gutters, drowning out the sounds of the city. In the silence between the drops, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear it. The click of a latch engaging, the soft sound of a door closing, the whisper of a secret, almost kept. Almost, but not quite. The years turned slowly after the Brennan case closed. Chen worked through her rotation of investigations, attended trainings, testified at trials, filed reports. The city changed around her. New buildings rose downtown. Old neighborhoods gentrified. Crime patterns shifted. But the work remained constant. People lied. People disappeared. People killed each other for reasons that made sense only in the moment. Chen kept asking questions, kept opening doors. It was 3 years after Ryan Holt's conviction when Chen received a call from the state prison. An inmate wanted to speak with her. The name on the request form was Ryan Holt. Chen hadn't thought about him in months, maybe longer. The case was closed, the appeals exhausted. She assumed he wanted to confess something new, add details, seek some kind of closure. She scheduled the visit for the following week. The drive to the prison took 2 hours through flat countryside, past farms and small towns that looked like they'd stopped changing sometime in the 1980s. Chen arrived at the facility, signed in, passed through security, and waited in the same visiting room where she'd asked Ryan about Alison March years earlier. When Ryan was brought in, he looked worse than before. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, hair graying at the temples. He sat down across from Chen and thanked her quietly for coming. Chen asked him what he wanted. Ryan leaned forward, voice low, and told her he'd received a letter 6 months ago. Anonymous, no return address, postmarked from the city. The letter contained a single typed paragraph that read, "You didn't kill David Brennan. Someone used you. Check the timestamps on the burner phone. Check the door logs again. You were framed." Ryan insisted he'd dismissed it at first, assumed it was a prank or a cruel joke. But the letter had stayed with him, gnawed at him. He'd started reviewing his own memories, his own timeline, and realized there were gaps he couldn't explain. Chen listened, skeptical but intrigued. Ryan admitted he'd planned to kill David, confessed he'd gone to the apartment that night with intent. But he claimed he'd lost his nerve at the last second. He'd stood outside David's door, fishing line in hand, but couldn't go through. He'd left, walked back to his car, thrown the phone and the line in a dumpster 3 blocks away. He swore he'd never entered the apartment, never touched the Ambien, never staged the scene. Someone else had done it, using his plan, his tools, his motive, and that someone had left evidence pointing directly at him. Chen asked why he'd confessed if he hadn't done it. Ryan's voice cracked. He explained that when the police arrested him, when they showed him the evidence, the burner phone records, the fishing line fibers, the notebook, he'd believed he must have done it. He'd been drinking that night, stressed, exhausted. He'd assumed he'd blacked out, carried through with the plan without remembering. The confession had felt like the only honest thing to do. But now, reading the letter, reviewing the details, he wasn't sure anymore. He thought someone had set him up, used his obsession, his planning, his presence at the scene to frame him for a murder they'd committed. Chen asked who. Ryan shook his head. He had no idea. He'd thought about it endlessly, cycled through names, motives, possibilities. Maybe someone from work who hated David. Maybe someone connected to Alison. Maybe someone he'd never met. He couldn't prove anything. But he wanted Chen to look again, to check the timestamps, to verify the door logs, to see if there was any possibility he was telling the truth. Chen left the prison with a headache and a problem. The case was closed. The conviction was solid. Ryan's new claim contradicted his own confession and all the physical evidence. But the anonymous letter bothered her. 2 anonymous messages, years apart, both pointing to hidden layers in the Brennan case. Chen didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in patterns. And this pattern suggested someone out there knew more than they'd said. Back at the precinct, Chen pulled the Brennan case file again. She requested the original evidence logs, the digital forensics reports, the timeline reconstructions. She spent the next week rereading everything, cross-referencing timestamps, checking details. The burner phone records showed calls made to David's number on the night of the murder, consistent with Ryan's confession. But Chen noticed something she'd missed before. The call timestamps were logged by the cell tower, not by the phone itself. The tower records showed the calls originated from a location 3 blocks from David's apartment, near a commercial district. Ryan's car had been parked in that area based on traffic camera footage. But the footage didn't show Ryan walking toward David's building. It showed him walking in the opposite direction, toward the main road, at the time the calls were made. Chen pulled the traffic camera archive, requested additional angles. One camera, mounted on a corner store, had captured Ryan getting into his car and driving away 20 minutes before David's estimated time of death. If Ryan had left the area before the murder, how had the fishing line ended up in David's apartment? How had the Ambien been administered? Chen checked the door logs from David's building. The electronic records showed David's apartment door had been opened twice that night, once at 8:17, once at 9:43. The first entry matched David returning home from work. The second entry had no corresponding exit, which fit the theory that someone had staged the scene and left, but the door logs didn't record who had opened it, only that the lock had been disengaged. Chen requested the building's security footage. The original investigation had reviewed it, found nothing suspicious. But Chen watched it again, frame by frame. The lobby camera showed David entering at 8:15, taking the elevator upstairs. No one else entered the building through the front door that night. But there was a service entrance in the rear, used by maintenance and deliveries. That entrance had a separate camera, lower resolution, angled poorly. Chen watched the service entrance footage. At 9:30, a figure in a dark coat and hood entered through the rear, moved quickly toward the stairwell, stayed out of clear view. The figure's face was never visible. They disappeared into the stairwell, didn't reappear on camera. Chen checked the stairwell's access. It connected directly to the residential floors, bypassing the lobby. Chen's pulse quickened. Someone had entered the building through the service entrance, used the stairwell to reach David's floor, and left the same way. That person could have accessed David's apartment using a copied key or a lock-picking tool. The fishing line found in the apartment could have been planted by this person, not used by Ryan. The timeline fit. The evidence fit. Ryan might have been telling the truth. But who was the figure in the dark coat? Chen enhanced the footage, tried to extract identifying features. The figure was average height, average build, moved with confidence. Nothing distinctive. Chen checked the building's access logs for the service entrance. No keycard swipes, no records. The door had been propped open earlier that evening by a maintenance worker who'd been moving equipment. The worker had left it propped for convenience, planning to secure it later. Someone had taken advantage of the unsecured door. Chen interviewed the maintenance worker, an older man named Phil Garrett. Phil confirmed he propped the door open around 7, finished his work by 8:30, forgotten to close it properly. He'd realized his mistake the next morning, felt terrible when he'd heard about the murder. But he'd assumed it was a suicide, hadn't connected his oversight to the case. Chen asked if he'd seen anyone near the service entrance that night. Phil hesitated, then recalled that he'd passed someone in the stairwell around 9, a person in a dark coat heading upstairs. He'd assumed it was a resident, hadn't thought twice about it. When Chen asked for a description, Phil shrugged. Average height, hood up, face turned away. Could have been anyone. Chen returned to the precinct, frustration mounting. The figure in the stairwell was the key. If she could identify them, the case would crack open. But the footage was too poor, the description too vague. She needed another angle. She reviewed the evidence logs again, looking for anything that might point to a second person. The fishing line found in David's apartment had been generic, available at any hardware store. The Ambien bottle had David's fingerprints, consistent with his prescription. But the water glass on the nightstand had a partial print that didn't match David or Ryan. The print had been noted during the original investigation, but dismissed as irrelevant, possibly left by a guest or cleaning person days earlier. Chen requested a reanalysis of the partial print. The lab ran it through the database, came back with no matches. The print belonged to someone with no criminal record, no prior arrests. Chen asked the lab to compare it against prints from people connected to the case, David's co-workers, his friends, his family. The lab ran the comparisons, found a match. The partial print belonged to Monica Holt, Ryan's sister. Chen sat back, stunned. Monica had provided the notebook that convicted Ryan. Monica had been cooperative, helpful, seemingly devastated by her brother's actions. But Monica's fingerprint was in David's apartment, on a glass next to the bed where David had died. Chen pulled Monica's file, reviewed her background. Monica worked in IT, lived alone, had no criminal history. She described her relationship with Ryan as close but strained, mentioned that Ryan had confided in her about his frustrations at work. She'd claimed she'd found the notebook while cleaning Ryan's apartment after his arrest, turned it over immediately to help the investigation. But what if Monica hadn't just found the notebook? What if she'd read it earlier, seen Ryan's plan, and used it to kill David herself? Chen considered the motive. Monica had no obvious connection to David Brennan. But Chen dug deeper, requested Monica's employment records. Monica had worked for the same tech company as Ryan and David, but in a different department. She'd left the company a year before the murder, taken a position at a smaller firm. Chen contacted Monica's former supervisor, asked about her departure. The supervisor recalled that Monica had filed a complaint against a co-worker for harassment, but the complaint had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. The co-worker's name was David Brennan. Chen's breath caught. Monica had accused David of harassment. The complaint had been dismissed, but Monica had left the company shortly after. If Monica blamed David for her departure, for damaging her career, she had motive. And if she discovered Ryan's plan through his notebook, she had method. Chen requested the harassment complaint file, read through Monica's allegations. Monica claimed David had made inappropriate comments, sent unwanted messages, created a hostile work environment. David had denied everything, and the company's investigation had found insufficient evidence to support the claims. Monica had resigned in frustration, felt betrayed by the company and humiliated by the process. Chen arranged to interview Monica again, this time with a different approach. She contacted Monica, requested a follow-up meeting about Ryan's case, framed it as routine. Monica agreed. Met Chen at a coffee shop downtown. Chen started with casual questions, asked how Monica was coping, how Ryan was doing in prison. Monica answered calmly, expressed sadness about her brother's situation, insisted she'd done everything she could to help. Then Chen shifted, mentioned the fingerprint found in David's apartment. Monica's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened around her coffee cup. Chen explained that the print had been matched to Monica, asked how it had gotten there. Monica paused, then offered a plausible explanation. She'd visited David's apartment once, months before the murder, to pick up some files Ryan had left at David's place after a work meeting. David had invited her in, offered her water. She must have touched the glass then. Chen nodded, asked if she'd filed a harassment complaint against David. Monica's face hardened. She confirmed the complaint, described the experience as humiliating and futile. She insisted it had nothing to do with Ryan's case, had happened years earlier, was completely unrelated. Chen pressed gently, asked if Monica had known about Ryan's notebook before turning it in. Monica hesitated, then admitted she'd seen it weeks before Ryan's arrest. She'd been at Ryan's apartment, noticed the notebook on his desk, flipped through it out of curiosity. She'd been disturbed by the content, confronted Ryan about it. Ryan had dismissed it as venting, insisted he'd never act on it. Monica had believed him, hadn't thought to report it. After Ryan's arrest, she'd realized the notebook was evidence, turned it over immediately. Chen asked why Monica had touched the water glass in David's apartment months before the murder, but Monica's fingerprint was fresh enough to be detected. Monica's calm cracked slightly. She insisted the print must have been older, that the lab's timeline estimates were unreliable. Chen countered that forensic analysis suggested the print was recent, likely left within days of the murder. Monica's hands trembled. She declared the science was wrong, that Chen was grasping at straws, trying to invent a conspiracy where none existed. Chen shifted tactics, asked Monica where she'd been the night of the murder. Monica recounted her alibi, home alone, watching television. No one to confirm. Chen asked if Monica owned a dark coat, a hood. Monica's eyes flashed with anger. She snapped that everyone owned a dark coat, that Chen was harassing her, twisting innocent details into accusations. Monica stood up, announced she was leaving, warned Chen that she'd contact a lawyer if this continued. Chen let her go, watched Monica walk out of the coffee shop into the grey afternoon. She had suspicion, circumstantial evidence, a possible motive. But she didn't have proof. Monica's fingerprint in the apartment could be explained away. Her presence in the stairwell couldn't be proven. The harassment complaint provided motive, but motive alone wasn't enough. Chen needed something concrete, something that linked Monica directly to the murder. She returned to the evidence, reviewed the fishing line fibers found in David's apartment. The lab had determined the line was a common brand, sold at hardware stores across the city. Chen requested a list of purchases from stores near Monica's home and workplace. The stores didn't track individual buyers, but some had security footage archives. Chen requested footage from the week before the murder, spent hours watching customers browse aisles, make purchases. On the third store's footage, she found Monica. The timestamp was 4 days before David's death. Monica was at the checkout, purchasing fishing line, gloves, and a small toolkit. Chen felt the case shift. She contacted the DA, presented the new evidence, Monica's fingerprint in David's apartment, her harassment complaint against David, her purchase of fishing line, her lack of alibi, her presence in the building's stairwell. The DA reviewed the material, agreed there was enough to pursue charges. Chen obtained a warrant for Monica's arrest. Monica was taken into custody 2 days later. She refused to speak without a lawyer present. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Laura Finch, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Monica's fingerprint and fishing line purchase proved nothing. But Chen had one more card to play. She requested a forensic analysis of Monica's electronics, specifically her laptop and phone. The warrant was granted. The digital forensics team found deleted files on Monica's laptop, drafts of a plan, eerily similar to Ryan's notebook entries. Monica had written out a timeline, a method, a step-by-step approach to staging David's death as a suicide. She'd researched Ambien, door locks, evidence disposal. She'd documented her intent to frame Ryan, noted that Ryan's obsession with David made him the perfect scapegoat. The files had been deleted the day after David's murder, but the forensic team recovered them. Chen confronted Monica with the files in an interrogation room, her attorney present. Monica's composure finally shattered. She admitted everything. She confessed that she'd read Ryan's notebook weeks before the murder, realized his plan was meticulous, and decided to use it. She'd been consumed with rage toward David, blamed him for destroying her career, her reputation. She'd waited for an opportunity, monitored Ryan's movements, and on the night Ryan had planned to act, she'd followed him. When Ryan had lost his nerve and left, Monica had proceeded with the plan herself. She'd entered through the service entrance, picked David's lock, crushed the Ambien into his drink while he was in the bathroom, waited until he collapsed, then positioned the scene to look like a suicide. She'd taken the fishing line from Ryan's car earlier that evening, left it in the apartment to implicate him. She'd deleted her planning files, destroyed her dark coat, assumed the case would close quickly as a suicide or an open and shut conviction against Ryan. Monica's confession was recorded, signed, submitted as evidence. The DA dropped the charges against Ryan Holt, filed first-degree murder charges against Monica Holt. The media erupted. The story of a wrongful conviction, a framed brother, a vengeful sister became national news. Ryan was released from prison after serving 3 years for a crime he didn't commit. Chen testified at Monica's trial, walked through the investigation, the evidence, the timeline. Monica's attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, claimed Monica had been driven to temporary insanity by David's harassment and the company's failure to protect her. The jury deliberated for 2 days and returned a guilty verdict. Monica Holt was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Chen attended the sentencing, sat in the back of the courtroom, and watched Monica led away in handcuffs. Ryan was there too, sitting with a victim's advocate, his face drawn and exhausted. After the hearing, Chen approached him, asked how he was holding up. Ryan shook his head, voice hollow, and admitted he didn't know. He'd spent 3 years in prison for a crime his sister had committed, using his own plan, his own obsession. He'd lost his career, his freedom, his family. His sister had destroyed his life to avenge her own grievance. He didn't know how to process it, didn't know how to move forward. Chen offered no platitudes, no empty reassurances. She simply told him the case was closed, that justice had been served, and that he was free. Ryan thanked her quietly, then walked out of the courthouse into the winter afternoon. Chen watched him go, felt the familiar weight of a case settled, but not resolved. Ryan was innocent, but he'd still lost years. Monica was guilty, but her conviction didn't undo the damage. David Brennan was still dead, his family still grieving. The locked room had been opened, the truth revealed, but the cost was staggering. Chen returned to the precinct, filed her final reports, closed the Brennan case for the second time. The rain had started again, light and steady, tapping against the windows. She sat at her desk, stared at the stack of active cases waiting for her attention, and felt the familiar pull of the work. There were more locked rooms, more secrets, more doors that needed opening. The city kept generating them, an endless supply. She pulled the top file from the stack, a missing person case. A woman named Elena Torres, age 28, last seen leaving her apartment 6 days ago. No contact with family, no activity on her bank accounts, no cell phone signal. Chen read through the initial report, noted the inconsistencies, the gaps in the timeline. She picked up the phone, dialed the number for Elena's roommate, introduced herself, started asking questions. The roommate's answers were hesitant, vague, full of pauses that suggested something unsaid. Chen pressed gently, asked about Elena's routine, her relationships, her state of mind. The roommate mentioned that Elena had been stressed lately, worried about something at work, but wouldn't elaborate. Chen asked if Elena had mentioned any names, any conflicts. The roommate hesitated, then whispered a single name: Marcus Delgado, Elena's supervisor. Chen wrote it down, asked why the name mattered. The roommate's voice dropped lower, trembling slightly, and she revealed that Elena had filed a complaint against Marcus 2 weeks ago, claimed he'd been pressuring her, making threats. The company had launched an investigation, but Elena had been terrified of retaliation. Chen's instincts sharpened. She thanked the roommate, ended the call, and pulled up Marcus Delgado's information. No criminal record, clean background, worked at a mid-sized logistics firm downtown. Chen contacted the company's HR department, requested information about Elena's complaint. The HR representative was cooperative, but cautious. Confirmed that Elena had filed a formal grievance, alleging harassment and intimidation by her supervisor. The investigation was ongoing, but Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. Elena's disappearance had occurred 3 days after Marcus was notified of the leave. Chen felt the familiar pattern forming, a complaint, a conflict, a disappearance. She requested Marcus Delgado's contact information, scheduled an interview. Marcus agreed to meet, insisted he had nothing to hide. Chen met him at his home, a small apartment in a residential neighborhood. Marcus was in his mid-30s, well-dressed, polite, and defensive. He admitted knowing Elena, confirmed she'd worked under his supervision, but denied any harassment or threats. He claimed Elena had been underperforming, that he'd documented her mistakes, and that she'd filed the complaint in retaliation when he'd initiated a performance review. Chen asked where Marcus had been the night Elena disappeared. Marcus provided an alibi. Dinner with friends, then home alone, no one to confirm after 10. Chen asked if he owned a vehicle. Marcus nodded, pointed to a grey sedan parked outside. Chen requested permission to search it. Marcus hesitated, then agreed, confident there was nothing to find. Chen called for a forensic team, waited while they processed the car. An hour later, the team reported back. They'd found a small amount of blood in the trunk, barely visible. Likely cleaned recently, but not thoroughly enough. Chen's pulse quickened. She asked Marcus to explain the blood. Marcus's confidence cracked. He stammered that he'd helped a friend move furniture months ago, that someone must have scraped themselves, left a small stain. Chen didn't buy it. She arrested Marcus Delgado on suspicion of involvement in Elena Torres's disappearance. Marcus demanded a lawyer, refused to speak further. The blood sample was sent to the lab for analysis. Chen waited, paced the precinct hallways, reviewed the case files, searched for more connections. 2 days later, the lab confirmed the blood was a match for Elena Torres. Chen obtained a warrant for Marcus's apartment, led a search team through his home. They found Elena's purse hidden in a closet, her phone smashed and discarded in a kitchen drawer. Marcus had tried to dispose of the evidence, but hadn't been thorough. Chen confronted him again in the interrogation room, presented the evidence, asked him to explain. Marcus's lawyer advised him not to speak, but Marcus was unraveling. He suddenly blurted out that it had been an accident, that Elena had threatened to go public with her complaint, ruin his reputation. He'd followed her home, tried to reason with her, but she'd fought back. He'd grabbed her. She'd fallen, hit her head. He'd panicked, put her in his trunk, driven to a remote location, buried her in the woods. He'd cleaned the car, ditched her belongings, assumed no one would connect him. He'd underestimated the investigation. Marcus confessed to the location where he'd buried Elena. Chen coordinated with a search and rescue team, drove out to the site Marcus described, a wooded area 20 miles from the city. The team used ground-penetrating radar, found disturbed earth, excavated carefully. They recovered Elena Torres's body, confirmed her identity through dental records. The medical examiner determined cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with Marcus's confession. Marcus Delgado was charged with second-degree murder and improper disposal of a body. The trial was set for the following summer. Chen testified, walked through the evidence, the timeline, the confession. Marcus's attorney tried to argue self-defense, claimed Elena had attacked first. but the forensic evidence contradicted the claim. The jury found Marcus guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Chen attended the sentencing, watched Elena's family weep in the gallery. Another case closed. Another locked room opened. But the weight never lifted. Each solved case left behind broken families, shattered lives, a void that justice couldn't fill. Chen walked out of the courthouse, drove back to the precinct, and pulled the next file from her stack. The work continued. It always did. The city generated secrets faster than Chen could solve them. But she kept trying. She worked late nights, early mornings, weekends. She chased leads, interviewed witnesses, reviewed footage, analyzed evidence. She opened locked rooms one by one and found truths that no one wanted to face. Some cases ended in arrests, convictions, justice. Others ended in dead ends, cold trails, unanswered questions. But Chen kept working, kept asking, kept looking for the detail that didn't fit. Because someone had to. Someone had to stand in the rain, stare at the locked door, and refuse to walk away. Someone had to keep knocking, keep pushing, keep demanding answers. And if that someone was Chen, then she'd keep doing it until the doors ran out, or she did. Years blurred together. Chen's caseload grew, her reputation spread, her clearance rate climbed. She became known as the detective who never gave up, the one who solved the impossible cases. Other officers brought her their cold files, their unsolvable mysteries, and Chen worked them all. She found patterns others missed, asked questions others didn't think to ask, opened doors others assumed were sealed forever. But the cost accumulated. Chen's personal life disintegrated. Relationships failed, friendships faded, family connections frayed. She missed holidays, birthdays, gatherings. Her apartment became a place to sleep between shifts, a storage unit for case files and evidence photos. Her refrigerator held takeout containers and expired milk. Her phone was always on, always ringing, always pulling her back to the precinct. She didn't mind. The work was enough. The locked rooms were enough. Each solved case justified the sacrifice, proved that the effort mattered. And when the rain fell, when the nights stretched long and empty, Chen sat at her desk, reviewed her files, and reminded herself why she did it. Because someone had to. Because the victims deserved it. Because the doors wouldn't open themselves. One evening, nearly a decade after the Brennan case, Chen was working late, reviewing a cold case from 8 years prior. A woman named Sarah Lim had disappeared from her home. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The case had been classified as a voluntary missing person, assumed that Sarah had left to start a new life. But something about the file bothered Chen. The timeline had gaps. The witnesses had inconsistencies. The assumptions felt too easy. Chen pulled the original reports, interviewed Sarah's family again, requested updated records. She discovered that Sarah had been in an abusive relationship with a man named Derek Wu. That friends had urged her to leave, that she'd been planning to file for a restraining order. Derek had denied any abuse, provided an alibi for the day Sarah disappeared, and the case had stalled. But Chen dug deeper, requested Derek's financial records, found a series of cash withdrawals in the days before and after Sarah's disappearance. She tracked his movements, discovered he'd rented a storage unit 2 days before Sarah vanished. Chen obtained a warrant, searched the storage unit. Inside, she found Sarah's belongings, clothing, documents, personal items. No body, but enough evidence to suggest Derek had been involved. Chen arrested Derek Wu, confronted him with the evidence. Derek's lawyer advised silence. But Chen pressed. She presented the financial records, the storage unit contents, the witness statements. Derek finally cracked, admitted he'd killed Sarah during an argument, buried her body in a remote location, cleaned out her apartment to make it look like she'd left voluntarily. Derek led Chen to the burial site, a wooded area outside the city limits. The team excavated, recovered Sarah's remains, confirmed her identity. Derek Wu was charged with murder, convicted, sentenced to life in prison. Sarah's family finally had closure, a grave to visit, a truth to hold. Chen attended the funeral, stood in the back, watched the family grieve. Another locked room opened. Another door closed. The rain fell that day, steady and cold, drumming on the cemetery grass. Chen stood under an umbrella, watched the casket lowered into the ground, and felt the weight of the years pressing down. How many cases had she worked? How many doors had she opened? How many more were waiting? She didn't know. She couldn't count them all. But she knew she'd keep going, keep working, keep asking questions, until there were no questions left to ask. As the service ended, Chen walked back to her car, drove through the rain-soaked streets, and returned to the precinct. Her desk was piled with files, her computer screen glowing with new case updates. Her phone already ringing. She answered, listened to the report of a body found in an alley, a wallet missing, no witnesses. Chen grabbed her coat, her notebook, her keys, and headed out into the rain. Another locked room, another door, another truth waiting to be found. The work never stopped. The city never slept. And Chen never walked away. She kept knocking, kept pushing, kept opening the doors no one else could. Because someone had to. Because the rain kept falling. Because the secrets kept piling up. And someone had to be there to dig through them, to find the truth buried underneath. Chen arrived at the scene, ducked under the crime scene tape, and started asking questions. The uniformed officers gave her the basics. Male victim, mid-40s, single gunshot wound, no ID, no phone, no obvious motive. Chen knelt beside the body, studied the wound trajectory, the blood spatter, the position of the hands. Something didn't fit. The wallet was missing, but the watch was still on the wrist. Expensive watch, easily pawned. If this was a robbery, why leave the watch? Chen stood, scanned the alley, looked for cameras, for witnesses, for anything that might explain the inconsistency. A door at the far end of the alley caught her attention, propped open with a brick. She walked over, peered inside. Dark hallway, stairwell leading up. No lights, no sounds. She stepped inside, let her eyes adjust, and started climbing the stairs. The building was old, abandoned, filled with graffiti and debris. But on the second floor, Chen found something. A makeshift camp. Sleeping bags. Empty food containers. Signs of recent occupation. She called for backup, waited for the crime scene team to process the area. They found fingerprints, DNA samples, personal items. One item stood out, a notebook, filled with names, dates, addresses. Chen flipped through it, recognized some names from other cases, other investigations. This wasn't random. This was connected to something larger, something organized. She photographed every page, logged the evidence, and started tracing the names. The investigation expanded, pulling in other detectives, other departments. The notebook led to a network of individuals involved in illegal activities, fraud, identity theft, drug distribution. The victim in the alley had been part of the network, killed because he'd threatened to cooperate with police. The watch had been left to make it look like a botched robbery, throw investigators off the trail. But Chen had seen the inconsistency, followed the thread, and unraveled the entire operation. Over the next 6 months, Chen and her team arrested 17 people connected to the network. The prosecutions were complex, the evidence sprawling, but the cases held. Convictions came through, sentences handed down, the network dismantled. Chen testified at each trial, walked through the evidence, explained the connections. The defense attorneys tried to poke holes, find weaknesses, but the evidence was solid. The locked rooms had been opened, the secrets exposed. Chen's captain called her into his office after the final conviction, commended her work, offered her a promotion to lead the cold case unit full-time. Chen considered it, weighed the responsibility, the resources, the opportunity to solve even more cases. She accepted. The promotion came with a new office, a small team, and access to decades of unsolved files. Chen dove in, organizing cases by type, by region, by evidence quality. She prioritized the ones with the most potential, the ones where new technology or fresh perspectives might crack them open. Her team worked methodically, reviewing old evidence with modern forensic techniques, re-interviewing witnesses, following leads that had been dismissed years earlier. They solved cases that had been cold for 10, 15, 20 years. Families received closure, victims received justice, and the city's unsolved case backlog shrank steadily. But the work took its toll. Chen's health declined, chronic headaches, insomnia, stress-related issues. Her doctor warned her to slow down, take time off, prioritize self-care. Chen ignored the advice. The cases mattered more than her comfort. The locked rooms mattered more than her rest. She kept working, kept pushing, kept opening doors. One night, working late in her office, Chen collapsed. Her team found her, called an ambulance, rushed her to the hospital. The doctors diagnosed exhaustion, dehydration, and dangerously high blood pressure. They admitted her, insisted she stay for observation, ordered mandatory rest. Chen protested, argued she had cases to work, files to review, interviews to conduct. The doctors didn't care. They kept her in the hospital for 3 days, monitored her vitals, forced her to rest. During those 3 days, Chen lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the work. About the locked rooms, the opened doors, the truths she'd uncovered. About the families she'd helped, the victims she'd served, the justice she'd delivered. And about the cost, the years she'd lost, the relationships she'd sacrificed, the health she'd destroyed. She wondered if it had been worth it, if the balance made sense, if she'd made the right choices. She didn't have an answer, but when the doctors finally released her, when she walked out of the hospital into the cold morning air, Chen knew she'd keep going. Because the work wasn't finished. The locked rooms were still out there, waiting to be opened. And if she didn't open them, who would? Chen returned to the precinct, resumed her caseload, and kept working. But she made adjustments, regular breaks, shorter hours, delegated more to her team. The pace slowed, but the results didn't. The cases kept closing, the doors kept opening, the truths kept emerging. Chen learned to balance the urgency with sustainability, the drive with survival. Years continued to pass. Chen's reputation grew beyond the department, beyond the city. She was invited to speak at conferences, train other detectives, consult on difficult cases across the state. She shared her methods, her approaches, her instincts. She taught others to look for the detail that didn't fit, to ask the question no one else asked, to keep knocking on the locked doors until they opened. And through it all, the rain kept falling, steady, cold, relentless, washing the streets, filling the gutters, drowning out the noise. In the silence between the drops, if you listened carefully, you could hear it. The click of a lock disengaging, the creak of a door swinging open, the whisper of a secret finally told. Chen heard it every time she solved a case, every time she uncovered the truth, every time she opened another locked room. She didn't know how many more rooms were waiting. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. But she knew she'd keep trying, keep working, keep asking questions, until the doors ran out, or she did. Because someone had to. Because the victims deserved it. Because the rain kept falling, and someone had to be there to listen for the sound of the locks turning, the sound of the truth breaking free. Chen retired from the police force at 63, after 41 years of service. The department held a ceremony, presented her with plaques and commendations, gave speeches about her legendary career and unprecedented solve rate. Her colleagues stood and applauded, recounted cases she'd cracked, lives she'd changed, families she'd helped. Chen stood at the podium, looked out at the faces, and gave a short speech about persistence, about asking questions, about never walking away from a locked door. After the ceremony, Chen cleaned out her office, packed her files into boxes, and handed over her active cases to her successor. She drove home through familiar streets, parked in front of her apartment, and carried the boxes inside. The apartment felt emptier than usual, quieter, as if the absence of work had created a vacuum. Chen stacked the boxes in the corner, made tea and sat by the window, watching the rain fall. Retirement felt strange. The days stretched longer without the structure of investigations, without the urgency of cases demanding her attention. Chen tried to adjust, to find new routines, new purposes. She volunteered at a community center, mentored young detectives, organized her decades of case notes into a comprehensive database. She took walks, read books, reconnected with old friends. But the rhythm felt off, incomplete, as if something essential was missing. 6 months into retirement, Chen received a call from a woman named Rebecca Torres. Rebecca's sister, Maria, had disappeared 23 years earlier, and the case had gone cold. Rebecca had heard about Chen's reputation, about her ability to solve impossible cases, and wanted to know if Chen would be willing to review Maria's file. Chen hesitated. She was retired, no longer had access to official resources, no longer carried the authority of the badge, but something in Rebecca's voice, the quiet desperation, the refusal to let go, resonated. Chen agreed to look at the file. Rebecca brought the materials to Chen's apartment: police reports, witness statements, newspaper clippings, personal letters. Maria Torres had been 19 when she disappeared, a college student with plans to become a teacher. She'd gone out with friends one Friday night, left a bar around midnight, and never made it home. Her car was found abandoned 2 miles from her apartment. Keys in the ignition, purse on the front seat, no signs of struggle. The police had investigated, interviewed friends and family, searched the area, but found no leads. The case had eventually gone cold, filed away with thousands of others. Chen spread the materials across her dining table, reviewed the timeline, studied the witness statements. Something about the car bothered her. Keys in the ignition, purse on the front seat. If Maria had been abducted, why would the abductor leave those items? If she'd abandoned the car voluntarily, why leave the keys and purse? Chen made notes, identified inconsistencies, and started tracing the movements of everyone connected to Maria that night. She contacted the original investigating officer, now also retired, and asked about the case. He remembered it, recalled the frustration of hitting dead ends, the family's persistent calls for updates. He mentioned one detail that had always bothered him. A bartender at the venue where Maria had been that night had provided a statement, but the officer had felt the bartender was holding something back. The bartender's name was Cole Jenkins, and he'd worked at the bar for only a few months before quitting suddenly, 2 weeks after Maria disappeared. Chen tracked down Cole Jenkins, found him living in a neighboring state, working at a warehouse. She called, explained who she was and why she was reaching out. Cole initially refused to talk, claimed he didn't remember anything useful, said he'd already given a statement years ago. Chen pressed gently, mentioned that new information sometimes surfaces with time, that even small details could matter. Cole hesitated, then admitted he'd been uncomfortable talking to the police back then because he'd been undocumented at the time, worried about immigration consequences. Chen assured him she wasn't with law enforcement anymore, that she was working privately for the family, that anything he shared would be handled carefully. Cole finally opened up. He remembered Maria from that night, recalled she'd been arguing with someone outside the bar, a man Cole didn't recognize. The argument had seemed intense, personal, and Cole had considered intervening. But Maria and the man had left together before he could. Cole had mentioned the argument briefly in his original statement, but the investigating officer had focused on the friends Maria had been with inside the bar, not on the unknown man outside. Chen asked Cole to describe the man. Tall, dark hair, wearing a jacket with a logo Cole couldn't quite recall. Maria had seemed to know him, had called him by name, but Cole hadn't caught it. Chen pressed for more details, approximate age, build, distinguishing features. Cole thought hard, then remembered the jacket logo. It had been for a local gym, a place called Iron Peak Fitness. The gym had closed years ago, but Chen made a note, thanked Cole for his cooperation, and started researching Iron Peak Fitness. She found archived records, membership lists, staff rosters. Cross-referencing the timeline of Maria's disappearance, Chen identified employees who'd worked at the gym during that period. One name stood out, Daniel Reeves, a personal trainer who'd resigned abruptly 2 weeks after Maria disappeared. Chen traced Daniel Reeves, found he'd moved several times over the years, eventually settling in a small town 3 hours away. Chen contacted Rebecca, explained what she'd found, and suggested they approach Daniel Reeves carefully. Rebecca wanted to confront him immediately, but Chen cautioned patience. They needed more information, more evidence before making accusations. Chen hired a private investigator to conduct surveillance on Daniel, to observe his routines, his contacts, his behavior. The investigator reported back, Daniel Reeves lived alone, worked as a mechanic, kept to himself, showed no signs of criminal activity. Chen decided to approach Daniel directly. She and Rebecca drove to his town, found his address, and knocked on his door. Daniel answered, looked surprised, asked who they were. Chen introduced herself as a retired detective, Rebecca as Maria Torres's sister. Daniel's expression shifted, from surprise to recognition to something darker. He stepped back, tried to close the door, but Chen held it open, insisted they needed to talk. Daniel reluctantly let them in. The house was sparse, clean, impersonal. Daniel sat in a chair, arms crossed, defensive. Chen started with the basics, confirming Daniel had known Maria, had worked at Iron Peak Fitness, had been seen with Maria the night she disappeared. Daniel denied everything at first, claimed he didn't remember Maria, didn't recall working at the gym. But as Chen pressed, presenting details from Cole's statement, from the gym records, Daniel's resistance cracked. He admitted he'd known Maria, that they'd been seeing each other casually, that he'd met her outside the bar that night. Rebecca leaned forward, demanded to know what happened. Daniel stammered, insisted it was an accident, that they'd argued, that Maria had gotten upset and tried to leave, that he'd grabbed her arm to stop her, and she'd fallen, hit her head on the edge of the car door. He'd panicked, checked her pulse, realized she wasn't breathing, and made a terrible decision. He'd driven her body to a remote location, buried it, then returned her car to where it was found, staging it to look like she'd abandoned it voluntarily. Rebecca's face went white. Chen asked Daniel where he'd buried Maria. Daniel hesitated, then described the location, a wooded area near a reservoir, accessible by a dirt road that few people used. Chen took detailed notes, contacted local authorities, arranged for a search team to investigate the site. Daniel was arrested, charged with manslaughter and obstruction. Over the following weeks, the search team excavated the area Daniel had described, recovered human remains, confirmed through DNA that they belonged to Maria Torres. Rebecca finally had closure, a body to bury, a truth to hold. Daniel Reeves was convicted, sentenced to 20 years in prison. Chen attended the sentencing, sat beside Rebecca, and watched the judge deliver the verdict. Another locked room opened, another door closed, another family given the answers they'd waited decades to receive. After the trial, Rebecca hugged Chen, thanked her for not giving up, for seeing what others had missed, for giving Maria's memory the justice it deserved. Chen accepted the gratitude quietly, knowing the work had mattered, that the years of training, of instinct, of persistence, had paid off one more time. Even in retirement, the locked rooms kept calling, and Chen kept answering. Word of the Maria Torres case spread. Other families reached out, other cold cases found their way to Chen's door. She couldn't take them all, but she took the ones that resonated, the ones where the inconsistencies were clearest, the ones where she felt she could make a difference. She worked privately now, without the resources of the department, but with the freedom to pursue cases on her own terms, at her own pace. Chen's later years became a quiet crusade, a continuation of the work that had defined her life. She solved cases that had been cold for 30, 40 years. She reunited families with lost loved ones, brought closure to parents who'd spent lifetimes wondering. She opened locked rooms that everyone else had assumed were sealed forever, proved that persistence, patience, and the right questions could crack even the oldest mysteries. The rain kept falling, steady and cold, washing the streets clean, filling the gutters, drumming against the windows. Chen sat by her window on quiet evenings, listened to the rain, and thought about the work. About the doors she'd opened, the truths she'd uncovered, the lives she'd touched. She didn't know how many more cases she'd solve, how much longer she could keep going. But she knew she'd keep trying, keep asking, keep knocking on the locked doors, until there were no more doors left, or until she ran out of time. Because someone had to. Because the victims deserved it. Because the rain kept falling, and someone had to be there to listen for the sound of the locks turning, the sound of the truth breaking free. Chen had spent her life opening locked rooms, and she'd keep opening them until the very end. The work was never finished. The city generated secrets faster than anyone could solve them. But Chen would keep trying, keep working, one locked door at a time, until the final door closed behind her. Chen passed away on a Tuesday morning in late autumn at the age of 78. The rain was falling when it happened, steady and soft, the way it had fallen on so many cases, so many nights spent reviewing files, so many moments of revelation. She died in her apartment, surrounded by case files, notebooks filled with questions, photographs of victims whose names she'd never forgotten. The coroner ruled it natural causes, a quiet end to a life that had been anything but quiet. The funeral was small. Former colleagues attended, a handful of families she'd helped over the years, a few cold case advocates who'd worked with her in retirement. Rebecca Torres gave a brief eulogy, spoke about Chen's dedication, her refusal to let time erase the truth, her ability to see what others missed. The service was simple, respectful, the kind of goodbye Chen would have wanted. After the funeral, Rebecca returned to Chen's apartment to sort through her belongings. The landlord had given her a week to clear everything out. Rebecca moved through the rooms slowly, carefully, treating each item with reverence. The apartment was filled with evidence of Chen's work. Filing cabinets stuffed with case folders, bookshelves lined with forensics manuals and criminology texts, boxes of personal correspondence from families seeking her help. In the corner of the living room, Rebecca found Chen's final case file. It was thinner than the others, recently started, with only a few pages of notes inside. The case involved a woman named Sarah Kimball, who'd disappeared from a parking garage 15 years earlier. Chen had just begun reviewing the file when she died, had made initial observations about inconsistencies in the timeline, had identified witnesses who might be worth re-interviewing. The work was unfinished, questions left unanswered, another locked door Chen wouldn't get to open. Rebecca sat on the floor, read through Chen's notes, felt the weight of the unfinished work. She thought about contacting someone, passing the case along to another investigator, making sure Sarah Kimball's family got the same closure Maria's family had received. But as she read, Rebecca realized something. Chen's legacy wasn't just the cases she'd solved. It was the method, the approach, the persistent refusal to accept locked doors as final answers. Chen had taught others, mentored young detectives, shared her techniques with anyone willing to learn. The work would continue, carried forward by those she'd influenced, those she'd trained, those who'd learned to ask the right questions. Rebecca gathered Chen's case files, donated them to the police department's cold case unit, with instructions that they be made available to investigators and researchers. She kept the Sarah Kimball file separate, personally delivered it to a detective Chen had mentored years earlier, explained the situation, asked if he'd be willing to continue the work. The detective accepted, promised to pursue the case with the same diligence Chen would have demanded. 6 months later, the detective called Rebecca. He'd reopened the Sarah Kimball investigation, followed Chen's initial notes, re-interviewed the witnesses she'd identified. One witness, a parking garage attendant who'd been on duty the night Sarah disappeared, finally admitted he'd seen something he hadn't reported originally. A man helping Sarah into a vehicle. A man the attendant recognized as Sarah's ex-boyfriend. The ex-boyfriend had an alibi for that night, but Chen's notes had raised questions about its validity. The detective pressed harder, found inconsistencies, eventually broke the alibi. The ex-boyfriend confessed to killing Sarah during an argument, disposing of her body in a remote location. Sarah's remains were recovered, her family given closure, another locked room opened. When Rebecca heard the news, she thought about Chen, about the unfinished file on the living room floor, about the persistent refusal to let time erase the truth. Chen hadn't solved this case personally, But her work had made the solution possible. Her questions had pointed the way. Her instincts had identified the cracks. Her legacy had carried the investigation forward even after she was gone. The rain kept falling, steady and cold, washing the streets clean, filling the gutters, drumming against the windows. In police stations across the city, detectives opened old files, asked new questions, knocked on doors that had been locked for decades. Some of them had learned from Chen directly. Others had studied her methods, absorbed her techniques, adopted her relentless approach. The work continued, generation after generation, detective after detective, case after case. Chen's name faded from the headlines, became a quiet legend within the department, a standard against which others measured themselves. New detectives heard stories about the woman who could open any locked room, who never gave up, who saw patterns no one else could see. Some dismissed the stories as exaggeration, myth-building. But others listened carefully, studied her case files, tried to understand what made her different, what allowed her to succeed where others failed. The answer was simple, though not easy: persistence. The refusal to accept locked doors as final. The willingness to keep asking questions long after everyone else had moved on. The understanding that truth doesn't disappear just because time passes, that secrets leave traces, that locked rooms can always be opened if you're patient enough, careful enough, determined enough to find the key. Chen's apartment was eventually rented to someone new, her belongings dispersed, her personal effects distributed among family and colleagues. But her work remained, preserved in case files, recorded in court transcripts, remembered by the families she'd helped. The locked rooms she'd opened stayed open. The truths she'd uncovered stayed true. The lives she'd touched stayed touched. And somewhere, in a filing cabinet in a police station basement, in a box in an evidence locker, in a folder on a detective's desk, another locked room waited. Another case unsolved. Another family searching for answers. Another secret waiting to be uncovered. The rain kept falling, and somewhere someone was listening for the sound of the locks turning, the sound of the truth breaking free. Chen was gone, but the work remained. The locked rooms remained. The questions remained. And as long as someone was willing to keep asking, keep searching, keep knocking on those locked doors, the work would continue. One case at a time, one question at a time, one locked room at a time. The rain fell, steady